Electro science.
Electro. Why do we watch the stars? Are we alone in the universe? What are atoms? Electro. Why are we here? Where did we come from? E equals MC. Electro. Periodic table of elements. Astrology. What is astrology?
Electro science.
Now today we're going to talk about physical and chemical changes. In the world around us, there are hundreds of physical and chemical changes we encounter every day of our lives. For example, this pizza here. When I take my pizza cutter and I cut myself a slice, is that a chemical change or is it a physical change? Well, let's think for a second. A chemical change is when something changes chemically, when there's a chemical reaction taking place. Now, an example could be oxidation, which is like rust, when your car rusts. Physical change would be an example of when something changes state, size, or shape. Now, an example could be an ice cube. When you take an ice cube and you melt it, what are you doing? You're changing the state of it, or the state of it. So, you still have two hydrogens for every oxygen, H2O. It's still water, it's just a different state of water. With that in mind, this pizza here that I've cut myself a slice, is this a chemical or physical change? Obviously it's a physical change. Now, pizza itself can be a chemical change. This pizza that I am eating here started out as nothing more than a small circle of dough in a tray, in a stack of about 15 trays. When it was put into the oven, it changed size and the CO2 was released. That was physical changing, but it's no longer just dough. When you cook a lot of things, like popcorn or pizza, you're seeing a chemical change. But a physical change, you're cooking your chicken, or you're cooking a cheeseburger, or something of that. When you bake a cake, it's also a chemical change because the components that go into making a cake, the egg, the sugar, the flour, and when you create the batter, it's far different than what you started with. And just as well, when you cook the cake, or bake the cake, the final result is much different than the components you began with. Okay, let's look at some examples of physical and chemical changes now. Let's look at some physical changes first. Let's say that here we have physical changes. Water in a sponge, a cloud forming, glass breaking, inflating a basketball, deflating a basketball, ripping tin foil, crumpling a ball of paper. These are examples of things that are simply changing, physically. Okay, now let's look at some examples of some chemical changes now. A chemical change being when a chemical reaction happens. Telltale signs are when color changes or heat or light is created, or during decomposition. Fruit rotting, fireworks, photosynthesis. Analyzing physical and chemical changes is just one more way we can try and understand the world in which we live. It's enjoyable to be able to see nature and non-nature and understand what's happening. When we think of science, we think of chemicals and experiments in a laboratory in a forgotten, part of somewhere where it's very closed and only the people with the highest intelligence and the lab coats and the goggles and the funny hair are able to understand science. But when we understand these subtle things in science, like baking a cake, how it is deeply related to science, and cutting pizza, and all of these things, we're able to see that science is not some big laboratory experiment where you're finding cures for, diseases. It's baking a cake. It's driving a car. It's just everything around us is science. And I feel that if we bring science to the masses, we can help better ourselves, because to understand science is to understand the world. We live in a world fueled by science and technology where the mass majority of people do not understand how it works, what science is. Everything in our society is run on science, the principles of science, and yet the average person doesn't really know too much about it, which is highly frightening. And I hope that with these videos, I can help my few viewers better understand the concepts that we live with. Thank you.